When I sat across from my patients in my clinic in Küsnacht on the shores of Lake Zurich, I began to notice a curious, almost disturbing phenomenon among those who had embarked on the arduous journey of inner transformation. A man would enter my study, sit in the leather armchair opposite mine, and speak not of his own despair, but of the sudden, inexplicable hostility of those around him. He would say to me, "Dr. Jung, I have stopped lying to myself. I have faced my fears. I have begun to speak my truth. Yet, instead of celebrating my growth, my family, my friends and my colleagues are pulling away. Some are furious. Others act as though I have betrayed them. Why can they no longer handle my presence?" In my decades of analyzing the human psyche, I came to understand a profound and unsettling reality. What modern society so naively views as an interpersonal conflict or a sudden drift in relationships is almost never about a breakdown in communication. It is a fundamental collapse of a shared psychological illusion. When you begin the quiet, painstaking work of individuation, when you pull back your projections, integrate your shadow, and step out of the unwritten scripts handed to you by your environment, you alter the energetic equilibrium of every room you enter. You become a mirror, and there is nothing the unexamined ego fears more than a mirror that refuses to distort the truth. If you are listening to this, it is very likely because you have reached a threshold in your own life where people who once claimed to care for you can suddenly no longer tolerate your presence. They tell you that you have changed, that you have become distant, cold, or arrogant. But what they are actually reacting to is the sudden death of the role you used to play in their personal psychological equilibrium. You are no longer acting as a container for their unintegrated fears. You are no longer accepting their projections. You have become a living, breathing reminder of everything they have chosen to repress within themselves. Understanding this dynamic is not merely an academic exercise in analytical psychology. It is a matter of psychological survival. If you do not grasp why others are suddenly pulling away or lashing out, you will fall into the tragic trap of self-doubt. You will believe that your growth is a defect, that your emerging wholeness is a mistake, and you will be tempted to shrink back into the safe, suffocating confines of your former persona. Let us journey together into the deepest layers of the mind. Let us explore the hidden mechanics of why your growth threatens the unintegrated consciousness of those around you, and how you can stand firm in your truth without falling into bitterness, arrogance, or isolation. Let me share with you a specific case from my clinical records that illustrates this precise threshold of human transformation. A middle-aged gentleman, let us call him Thomas, came to see me in Zurich many years ago. Thomas was a successful executive, widely admired for his gentle demeanor, his endless patience, and his uncanny ability to smooth over every conflict in his large family and his high-pressure company. He was, by all societal standards, a pillar of his community. Yet, when Thomas sat in my consulting room, his eyes carried the profound exhaustion of a man who was quietly dying inside. As we began our work together, analyzing his dreams and tracing the origins of his psychological posture, a clear pattern emerged. Thomas was trapped in what I termed an affect-toned complex of extreme compliance. From early childhood, he had learned that his safety and worth depended on his ability to absorb the anxiety of others. He had constructed an exquisite, polished persona, the dutiful mediator, the tireless martyr, the man who never said no. In the language of analytical psychology, Thomas had exiled his own legitimate aggression, his boundaries, and his authentic desires into the dark realm of the shadow. He allowed everyone around him to project their needs onto him while he bore the weight of their unacknowledged demands. Then, the turning point arrived. Through intensive analysis and the practice of active imagination, Thomas began to integrate his shadow. He realized that his constant agreeableness was not a virtue, but a subtle form of cowardice, a desperate strategy to avoid conflict and earn conditional love. Quietly, without malice or dramatic declarations, Thomas changed. The next time a business partner demanded an unfair concession, Thomas simply looked him in the eye and said, "No, I will not agree to those terms." When his sister attempted to guilt him into solving a problem she had created for herself, he calmly replied, "I love you, but this is a responsibility you must carry yourself." What followed was a storm of psychological resistance. His partner accused him of being ruthless and power-hungry. His family claimed he had become selfish, cold, and unfeeling. They did not celebrate his newfound clarity or his relief from decades of depression. They mourned the loss of the servant they had grown accustomed to exploiting. When Thomas returned to my office, shaken by the severity of their backlash, I pointed out a subtle detail he had observed during these confrontations. I asked him, "What did you notice in their faces, Thomas, in the exact second before they became angry?" He paused, remembering, and said, "A flash of pure panic." That flash of panic is the central key to this entire phenomenon. When you observe micro-expressions during moments of sudden relational rupture, you will see that anger, ridicule, and withdrawal are merely secondary defenses. The primary reaction of an unconscious mind when confronted by an integrated individual is primitive terror. If you are currently experiencing this shift in your own life, if you have noticed that speaking your truth or setting a simple boundary causes others to react with irrational hostility, I invite you to pause and reflect right now. Take a moment and leave this phrase in the comments below. I honor my growth, even when it disturbs the silence. Writing this is an act of psychological declaration, a signal to your unconscious mind that you choose self-awareness over compliance. As we probe deeper into this psychological breakdown, we must examine what occurs during moments of intense pressure, betrayal, or systemic collapse. I have observed throughout my life that human beings do not reveal their true character during times of peace and comfort. It is under the weight of a crisis, when the social structure cracks and the ego is stripped of its comfortable routines, that the persona dissolves and the raw, unintegrated contents of the unconscious come flooding to the surface. I call this moment the persona breakdown. In a healthy, individuating person, a crisis brings forth what I term strategic awareness and differentiated consciousness. Because such an individual has spent time in the dark caverns of their own psyche, because they have wrestled with their own shadow and acknowledged their own capacity for ill, they do not panic when darkness manifests in the world around them. They possess a quiet, grounded stillness. They operate with selective empathy, not the frantic, uncritical empathy that seeks to rescue everyone at the cost of one's own integrity, but a conscious, firm compassion that honors truth and enforces necessary boundaries. However, observe what happens to the unintegrated mind during a similar event. When a person who relies entirely on their social persona is confronted by a crisis, or when they are confronted by you, standing calmly in your integrated power, their egoic structure faces a catastrophic threat. You see, most people construct their entire identity around a fragile set of collective agreements. They agree to act out a specific role, and in exchange, they expect you to act out yours. They say, "I will pretend to be the selfless parent if you pretend to be the grateful child. I will pretend to be the benevolent leader if you pretend to be the submissive follower." This tacit agreement forms a delicate web of mutual self-deception. When you step out of this web, when you refuse to play your assigned part in their internal theater, you induce an immediate identity crisis in them. Your presence forces what I termed a clarity event. In your quiet refusal to participate in their illusions, you expose the artificiality of their entire existence. They cannot handle you anymore because your simple, quiet authenticity acts as an unyielding spotlight pointed directly at their repressions. If you are calm, their irrationality becomes undeniable. If you are honest, their subtle manipulations stand out in stark relief. If you are free, their self-imposed chains become agonizingly visible. Faced with this terrifying illumination, the unconscious mind of the other person has only two choices. They must either enter the painful fire of self-reflection, acknowledge their own shadow, and begin the difficult path of individuation, or they must destroy the spotlight. Tragically, the vast majority of human beings will choose to attack the spotlight rather than face their own darkness. They will attempt to discredit you, slander your motives, or label you as dangerous and unhinged. They will tell mutual acquaintances that you have lost your way, that you are arrogant, or that you have become toxic. Do not fall into the trap of trying to defend yourself or explain your transformation to those who are determined not to understand it. To argue with a person who is defending their repressions is to argue with a drowning man who views your life raft as a threat to his survival. If you have reached the point in your journey where you no longer feel compelled to explain your boundaries to those who profit from your lack of them, type this second declaration in the comments below. My clarity requires no permission. Let this be your internal anchor as we examine the structural architecture of the psyche itself. To fully understand why your transformation triggers such deep instability in others, we must descend into the structural architecture of the mind as I mapped it throughout my life's work. The human psyche is not a single, unified entity. It is a complex cosmos comprised of distinct, dynamic layers that constantly interact with one another. At the surface lies the ego, the conscious organizer of our daily thoughts and perceptions. Wrapped around the ego is the persona, the mask we construct to present an acceptable, desirable image to the external world. Beneath the conscious surface lies the personal unconscious, where we store memories, forgotten experiences, and, most importantly, the shadow. The shadow consists of all those aspects of ourselves that we have rejected, denied, or deemed incompatible with our chosen persona. Beyond the personal lies the collective unconscious, the vast reservoir of archetypal patterns and inherited human potential shared by all mankind. When an individual remains unconscious, their psyche relies heavily on a mechanism I termed projection mapping. Because they cannot bear to acknowledge the dark, selfish, aggressive, or even powerful traits hidden within their own shadow, their ego automatically projects these disowned traits onto the people around them. When you were unintegrated, you willingly served as a screen for their projections. You accepted their judgments, swallowed their guilt, and adjusted your behavior to appease their expectations. But as you progress through the process of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness, you perform what analytical psychology calls the transcendent function. You bridge the gap between your conscious ego and your unconscious shadow. You integrate your disowned power, your healthy aggression, and your natural instinct for self-preservation. As you step into wholeness, you cease to be a passive screen for their projections. The projection hits your integrated consciousness and bounces back immediately to its source. To help you navigate this complex territory, I have categorized the reaction of the unconscious world into 3 distinct shadow traps that people will set for you, and 3 stages of relational transformation that you will inevitably pass through. First, let us examine the 3 shadow traps. The first trap is the guilt provocation. When an unconscious individual realizes they can no longer control your actions, they will attempt to control your emotions. They will invoke past sacrifices, play the victim, and accuse you of lacking empathy. They seek to trigger your old, dutiful complex so that you will step back into the compliant role you once occupied. The second trap is the pathologizing narrative. If guilt fails, they will attempt to reframe your strength as a psychological flaw. Your firmness will be labeled as narcissism. Your quiet self-possession will be called coldness or emotional detachment. Your commitment to truth will be labeled as stubbornness or madness. By convincing themselves and others that you are broken, they protect their own ego from the frightening realization that you have simply outgrown them. The third trap is the systemic exile. When an individual or a group recognizes that your presence consistently exposes their shadow dynamics, they will form an unspoken alliance to isolate you. They will exclude you from gatherings, withhold information, or create a subtle wall of silence. They hope that the terror of social abandonment will force you to surrender your integrity and return to the fold. Now, let us examine the 3 stages of relational transformation that occur as you walk this path. The first stage is the illusion of stability. In this stage, your relationships appear smooth and peaceful, but this peace is bought at the price of your self-suppression. You wear your persona comfortably, and others are well satisfied with the services you provide to their ego. The second stage is the crucible of friction. This is the painful, turbulent threshold where you currently find yourself. As you begin to integrate your shadow and speak with authentic authority, the old relational contract breaks down, chaos erupts, projections fly. You experience the deep sorrow of being misunderstood and rejected by those you once held dear. The third stage is the realignment of wholeness. If you possess the courage to endure the crucible of friction without retreating into your old persona, a profound shift occurs. The people who were only attached to your role will fade away from your life, their exit making room for new, differentiated individuals who respect your boundaries and honor your authentic self. You enter relationships based not on mutual psychological dependency, but on shared consciousness and genuine freedom. How do you apply these clinical insights to the practical reality of your daily life? How do you test whether a relationship is capable of enduring your transformation, or whether it is merely a dynamic built on mutual self-deception? I offer you a simple, definitive test that you can observe in real time, an observational method rooted in the study of psychological boundaries. Select a relationship in your life where you feel a subtle, ongoing tension regarding your growth. The next time this person presents you with an unreasonable request, an implicit expectation, or a subtle manipulation, do not react with anger, dramatic explanations, or defensiveness. Anger is merely a sign that your ego is still fighting for validation. Instead, execute a clean, calm, and absolute boundary. Simply state what you will or will not do, using few words, delivered in a neutral, quiet tone. For example, "I am not available to discuss this topic further," or "I understand your perspective, but my decision is final." Then, remain completely silent and observe their reaction. An individual who possesses psychological maturity and a capacity for genuine relationship may be surprised or disappointed, but they will eventually respect your boundary. They will engage with your adult ego. However, an individual who is bound to your old role will instantly display one of the 3 shadow traps we discussed. They will leap to anger, guilt, or pathologizing narratives. Their reaction will tell you everything you need to know about the true nature of that relationship. Let us explore how this dynamic manifests across 3 specific domains of your existence. First, in romantic relationships. Many partnerships are founded on what I called a collusion of complexes, an unconscious agreement where one partner plays the strong rescuer and the other plays the helpless victim, or where one acts as the dominant authority and the other as the compliant follower. When you begin to individuate, you break this unspoken contract. If your partner is unwilling to look at their own psyche, your growth will feel to them like a betrayal. They will accuse you of no longer loving them, when in truth, you have simply stopped participating in the shared neurotic pattern that previously passed for intimacy. Second, in workplace and social systems, institutions and social groups are highly sensitive to power dynamics and unspoken hierarchies. In these environments, compliance is often rewarded far more than true excellence or psychological wholeness. When you integrate your shadow, you acquire a quiet authority that cannot be easily intimidated or manipulated by corporate posturing. Your superiors and peers who rely on status and gamesmanship will instinctively feel threatened by your presence. They will sense that you cannot be bought with cheap praise or silenced by implicit threats, and they may attempt to marginalize you to protect the systemic illusion. Third, in private self-reflection and inner work. This is perhaps the most critical domain of all. When you observe the hostility or withdrawal of others, you will feel a powerful internal pressure to judge them, to view yourself as superior, or to slip into a state of self-pity. You must resist this temptation with every fiber of your being. Journaling and deep active imagination during these periods are essential. You must ask yourself, where am I still seeking their validation? What part of my own shadow is activated by their rejection? Am I standing in true wholeness, or am I hiding a subtle desire for vengeance behind my boundary? As we approach the culmination of our inquiry, I must issue a stern and uncompromising warning. It is extraordinarily easy for a person who has discovered psychological insights to fall into the deadliest trap of the ego, the trap of becoming a shadow hunter. This occurs when you take the concepts of analytical psychology, the shadow and projection, and turn them into weapons of intellectual arrogance. You begin to look down upon those who cannot handle you. You label your family members as unconscious, your former friends as toxic, and your colleagues as spiritually unevolved. You walk through the world with a cold, clinical detachment, analyzing everyone's flaws while secretly inflating your own ego. If you fall into this trap, you have not individuated at all. You have merely exchanged an agreeable persona for a spiritual or intellectual one. You have become possessed by the very darkness you claim to have transcended. As I have written throughout my career, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But making the unconscious conscious requires deep humility, not self-righteousness. This leads us to what I call the mirror effect. Everything that disturbs you about the reactions of others, their pettiness, their sudden coldness, their irrational anger, their refusal to see the truth, is also a latent potential within your own human nature. The hostility they direct at you for growing is a reflection of the hostility your own ego once directed at your own unconscious growth. When people pull away from you because they can no longer handle your truth, do not treat them with contempt. Treat them with profound, quiet compassion. They are fighting a desperate, terrifying battle against their own repressions. They are clinging to the raft of their persona because they believe that if they let go, they will drown in the chaotic sea of their own unconscious mind. You do not need to jump into the water with them to save them. You cannot carry another human being across the threshold of individuation. That is a journey every soul must walk on its own feet when it is ready, and not a moment before. Your sole duty, to yourself, to humanity, and to the divine spark within your own psyche, is to walk your path with unyielding integrity. Step fully into your wholeness. Integrate your shadow. Speak your truth with quiet, unshakable calm. Allow those who are ready for light to gather around you, and allow those who need the darkness to retreat into the shadows without your judgment. Individuation is not a path for the faint of heart. It requires you to endure the sorrow of being misunderstood, the loneliness of the desert, and the agony of shed illusions. But on the other side of that darkness lies the ultimate human reward, a life lived in absolute psychological freedom, grounded in truth, and aligned with the eternal architecture of the self. Walk forward with courage. Do not shrink back to make the world comfortable. Stand firm in the light of your emerging consciousness, and let the truth do its quiet, transformative work.